Welcome back to part 81 of our IPDRG Masterclass. We're diving right into the start of our major diagnostic category clinical deep dive module today. We are stepping out of the macro level revenue cycle and getting right into the clinical trenches. Our focus for this explainer, MDCO5, the cardiovascular system. But real quick, if you are enjoying this lesson, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel and share it with friends for this free course on Decode Healthcare with Harshal. Seriously, your support is absolutely crucial for keeping this free masterclass running. Okay, let's get into today's agenda. 1. Orientation and recap. 2. Decoding MDCO5. 3. High-volume DRG families. 4. CDI and audit defense. And finally, 5. Summary and next steps. We're moving systematically from high-level architecture right down to real-world audit defense. Section 1. Orientation and recap. Let's get our bearings. Just to briefly recap Part 80, we zoomed way out. We talked about inpatient DRG analytics, case mix index modeling, and those executive financial dashboards. Those dashboards give you the big picture of a facility's overall health, right? But here's the thing. They rely 100% on the accuracy of the underlying clinical coding. So today, we're popping the hood and looking at the actual engine driving those numbers. Section 2. Decoding MDC05, the cardiovascular system. MDCO5 covers diseases and disorders of the circulatory system, and it is a massive, massive revenue driver for any acute facility. The very first fork in the road here is the structural partition. Is the case medical or surgical? If a procedure meets the CMS definition of a major OR procedure, think a CABG, a valve replacement, or a pacemaker implant, bam, you're routed to a surgical DRG. But if the patient is treated conservatively, you land in a medical DRG, which is driven by principal diagnoses like heart failure or an acute MI. Today, we are completely mastering the medical side. Section 3. High-volume medical DRG families. Okay, think about how the MSDRG triplet structure works for codes 291, 292, and 293. You calculate your base hospital payment by multiplying the hospital base rate by the DRG relative weight. Having an MCC, a major complication or a comorbidity, pushes you up to DRG 291, securing the highest relative weight. If you've just got a CC, you land in 292. But if you're missing those specific modifiers entirely, you drop all the way down to DRG 293, which means the lowest payment. It's a huge financial swing. So how do we make sure we're capturing that acuity, specificity? Specificity is literally everything here. You have to document if the heart failure is systolic, HFrEF, reduced ejection fraction, or if it's diastolic, HFpEF. And you need the NYHA functional staging too. Documenting just CHF is simply too vague. It defaults to an unspecified code and plummets your DRG. You absolutely need to state if it's acute, chronic, or acute on chronic. Documenting acute on chronic systolic congestive heart failure, for example, acts as a powerful MCC. It paints the true picture of that patient's clinical severity and the resources they actually consumed. Now let's talk about acute myocardial infarctions, or AMIs. You have to nail down the anatomical wall specificity, meaning STEMI versus NSTEMI. But even more critical is distinguishing between a type 1 and a type 2 MI. Type 1 is your spontaneous coronary event, a plaque rupture. Type 2 is secondary to an ischemic imbalance, like demand ischemia or hypotension. And this brings up a golden coding rule. A type 2 MI, secondary to demand ischemia, codes only for the type 2 MI. Your coding and sequencing rules change completely based on that one distinction. There's also a very strict timeframe rule for MI coding. Day 1, initial admission. That's your initial MI. But what if that same patient comes back with a new site of MI within 4 weeks of that first event? You have to code it as a subsequent MI. Once you hit week 5 and beyond, a new event resets the clock and it's considered a new initial MI. It's a rigid timeline, but knowing it is non-negotiable for accurate coding. Section 4. CDI and audit defense. Because knowing the codes is really just step 1. Defending those codes against payer audits using clinical documentation improvement strategies. That's how you actually secure the revenue. You need to target high-yield secondary diagnoses. I'm talking about acute kidney injury and cardiorenal syndrome, severe hypertensive emergency, or acute respiratory failure. Remember, the principal diagnosis sets your base MDC, but these secondary targets dictate your CC or MCC modifier. If your heart failure patient also has acute respiratory failure requiring mechanical ventilation, capturing that correctly triggers a major complication and shifts your relative weight dramatically. So what's the game plan when a pair downgrades your type 2 MI or your acute systolic heart failure? You formulate a clinical validation appeal. First step, cross-check the principal diagnosis in the discharge summary against the history and physical and the progress notes. Discrepancies right there are the biggest cause of denials. Second, verify the clinical indicators. Echo, troponin labs, telemetry. Third, always confirm the present on admission or POA status. And fourth, if the documentation is even a little bit muddy, your CDI specialist has to step in and craft a compliant query. When writing that query, you can never ever tell the doctor what to write. It has to be non-leading. You simply present the clinical evidence and ask for clarification. You might ask them to clarify the type of heart failure, acute systolic or chronic, and specifically ask if the acute kidney failure was present on admission. It bridges the gap between the physician's clinical reality and what the coder can legally assign, all while keeping things compliant. Section 5, Summary and Next Steps. Let's consolidate everything we just covered. To wrap up MDC-05, remember, it all starts with the medical versus surgical partition. From there, clinical specificity is your absolute best friend. Acute versus chronic, type 1 versus type 2. Don't forget to aggressively capture those secondary CC and MCCs. And when in doubt, use compliant queries to lock in the acuity. Precise, specific documentation linking the etiology to its manifestations is the only way to prove how sick the patient truly is. Next time, in Part 82, we're jumping over to the surgical side of MDC-05, tackling complex procedures like CABG and interventional cardiology. It's going to be a great one. But before you head out, if you are enjoying this lesson, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel and share it with friends for this free course on Decode Healthcare with Harshal. I want to leave you with this one provocative thought. What happens if an acute kidney injury is documented as an MCC, but the present on admission flag is accidentally marked as N for not present? It turns into a hospital-acquired condition, and CMS will not increase your payment tier for it. In inpatient revenue cycle management, missing just one single letter, a Y versus an N, can literally cost a facility thousands of dollars on a single claim. Think about that next time you review a chart. See you all in Part 82.